The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the marble corridors of the federal courthouse, a sound that would reverberate through American history. Former President Donald Trump stood motionless as U.S. Marshal Sarah Chen secured the restraints, her hands steady despite the gravity of the moment. The charges were unprecedented: conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation, tampering with classified documents, and, most shocking of all, treason. "This is a travesty of justice," Trump's lead attorney, Marcus Whitfield, declared to the assembled press corps. His voice carried the weight of a man who had defended presidents and generals, but never under circumstances quite like these. Behind him, Secret Service agents maintained their protective formation, their faces masks of professional stoicism, despite the surreal nature of protecting a man being led away in federal custody. Judge Elizabeth Morrison had seen many high-profile cases in her 30-year career, but nothing had prepared her for this. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching on monitors in adjacent rooms. The defendant's table, normally occupied by common criminals and white-collar executives, now hosted the 45th President of the United States, flanked by a legal dream team whose hourly rates could fund small campaigns. The prosecution, led by Special Prosecutor David Chen, no relation to the marshal, had spent 3 years building their case. The evidence they claimed to possess was damning: recorded conversations, classified documents found in unauthorized locations, and testimony from witnesses who had remained silent for decades. But it was the final witness on their list that had everyone talking in whispers. A name that had been redacted in all public filings, known only as Witness X. As the preliminary hearing began, the tension in the room was palpable. Every word was being scrutinized by constitutional scholars, every gesture analyzed by body language experts broadcasting live to millions of viewers. This wasn't just a trial. It was a test of American democracy itself. Trump sat ramrod straight, his signature red tie the only splash of color against his navy suit. His eyes swept the courtroom with the calculating gaze of a man who had spent his life reading rooms and people. He whispered occasionally to Whitfield, who nodded grimly at each exchange. The prosecution's opening statement was methodical, painting a picture of a man who had placed personal ambition above national security. They spoke of secret meetings, of classified information shared with foreign agents, of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and threatened the very foundations of American democracy. Whitfield's response was electric. He paced before the jury like a caged tiger, his voice rising and falling with practiced precision. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are witnessing the weaponization of our justice system," he declared. "My client is not a traitor. He is a patriot, being persecuted by those who cannot accept the will of the American people." But as the day wore on, something else began to emerge from the prosecution's carefully crafted narrative. References to military communications, mentions of Pentagon briefings, and most intriguingly, repeated allusions to Operation Shadowfall, a classified mission that officially never existed. As Judge Morrison called for recess, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. In the back row, a man in an immaculate military dress uniform sat perfectly still, his chest heavy with ribbons and decorations. 4 stars gleamed on his shoulders, and his weathered face betrayed no emotion as he watched the proceedings with the intense focus of someone whose life had been built on making impossible decisions. General William Hayes had been silent for 3 years, but tomorrow everything would change. General William Hayes hadn't slept in 72 hours. The 4-star insignia on his dress blue uniform felt heavier than the day he'd first earned them, each star representing decades of service that had led him to this impossible moment. In his Pentagon office, surrounded by commendations and photographs, with presidents spanning 4 decades, he stared at the subpoena that would forever alter the trajectory of American history. His aide, Colonel Rebecca Martinez, stood at attention beside his desk. She had served under Hayes for 8 years through 3 deployments and countless classified briefings, but she had never seen her commanding officer look so haunted. "Sir, the car is ready," Martinez said softly. "Are you certain about this course of action?" Hayes picked up a manila folder from his desk, one that bore the highest classification markings the U.S. government possessed. Inside were documents that could topple governments, recordings that captured the voices of men who thought their secrets were buried forever, and photographs that told a story no one wanted to hear. 38 years I've worn this uniform. Rebecca, Hayes said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. I've sent men to die. I've kept secrets that would destroy families, and I've followed orders that kept me awake at night. But this, he tapped the folder. This is different. The drive to the courthouse was silent except for the hum of the armored vehicle's engine. Hayes watched the city pass by through bulletproof glass, knowing that within hours he would either be hailed as a hero or branded as the man who destroyed the military's chain of command forever. In the courtroom, the morning session had begun with testimony from former White House staffers. Each witness painted a picture of chaos and paranoia, of a president who had become increasingly isolated and desperate as investigations closed around him. But Hayes knew they were only seeing fragments of a much larger and more dangerous truth. Special. Prosecutor Chen was methodical in his questioning, building toward something that only Hayes fully understood. The prosecution's case wasn't just about document mishandling or obstruction. It was about something far worse, something that threatened the very security of the nation. Your Honor, Chen announced, the prosecution calls General William Hayes. The courtroom fell silent as Hayes rose from his seat. Every eye followed his measured walk to the witness stand, the soft tap of his polished shoes against marble the only sound in the cavernous room. He placed his right hand on the Bible and raised his left, taking an oath he had sworn dozens of times in various forms throughout his career. As he settled into the witness chair, Hayes made eye contact with Trump for the first time in 3 years. The former president's expression was unreadable, but Hayes caught something in his eyes. Recognition, fear, perhaps even a plea for mercy. General Hayes, Chen began, please state your current position for the record. I am the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the principal military advisor to the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council. And how long have you held this position? 4 years, 7 months, and 12 days. The precision of his answer sent a ripple through the courtroom. This was not a man who spoke carelessly or without purpose. General, are you familiar with something called Operation Shadowfall? Hayes felt his chest tighten. This was the moment of no return. I am. And what was Operation Shadowfall? Hayes looked directly at the jury, 12 ordinary Americans who would now bear the weight of extraordinary knowledge. Operation Shadowfall was a classified mission authorized at the highest levels of government to identify and neutralize foreign intelligence operations targeting U.S. military installations and personnel. Who authorized this operation, General? The courtroom was so quiet that Hayes could hear his own heartbeat. He glanced once more at Trump, then back to the prosecutor. The President of the United States. Which president, General Hayes? Donald J. Trump. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the scratch of reporters' pens and the soft hum of recording equipment. Hayes felt the weight of his decision settling over him like armor, heavy, protective, and irreversible. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess, but no one moved. The weight of General Hayes's words had frozen the courtroom in time, each person grappling with the implications of what they had just heard. When proceedings resumed, Special Prosecutor Chen approached the witness stand with the careful precision of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. In his hands, he carried a file marked with the highest security classifications, documents that had never seen daylight outside the Pentagon's most secure chambers. General Hayes, you testified that Operation Shadowfall was authorized by former President Trump. Can you elaborate on the nature of this authorization? Hayes straightened in his chair, every inch the military officer he had been for nearly 4 decades. On March 15th, 3 years ago, I was summoned to the Oval Office for what the President described as a matter of extreme national security. Present were the President, Chief of Staff Morrison, and National Security Advisor Phillips. What transpired during this meeting? The President informed me that he had received intelligence suggesting that several foreign governments were actively recruiting assets within our military command structure. He ordered me to initiate a counterintelligence operation to identify these assets and neutralize the threat. Defense Attorney Whitfield shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This testimony involves matters of national security that— Overruled, Judge Morrison said firmly. The witness may continue. Hayes nodded. The President's directive was clear. Use any means necessary to protect American military secrets. He signed Executive Order 14823, which gave Operation Shadowfall extraordinary latitude to investigate, surveil, and if necessary, detain any individual suspected of compromising national security. Chen moved closer to the witness stand. General, did you have concerns about this order? For the first time since taking the stand, Hayes hesitated. His eyes found his aide, Colonel Martinez, sitting in the gallery. She gave him an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. I did, Hayes admitted. The scope of the order was unprecedented. It essentially gave us carte blanche to investigate American citizens, including members of Congress, federal judges, and other military officers, without traditional oversight mechanisms. And did you voice these concerns? I did. I told the President that such an operation could violate the Posse Comitatus Act and potentially infringe upon constitutional rights. What was his response? Hayes's voice grew quieter, forcing the packed courtroom to strain to hear every word. He said, and I quote, "Bill, sometimes being president means making decisions that history will judge. I'd rather be judged for protecting America than for letting it fall to our enemies." The courtroom stirred. Trump's legal team exchanged urgent whispers while the prosecution maintained their poker faces despite what was clearly a crucial moment in their case. General Hayes, what happened next? We initiated Operation Shadowfall. Over the course of 18 months, we identified 17 individuals within the defense establishment who were passing classified information to foreign agents. 12 were American citizens. Chen paused, letting the number sink in. 17. Confirmed foreign assets within the U.S. military establishment? Confirmed and documented, yes, sir. And these individuals were arrested? Hayes's jaw tightened. That's where the operation became complicated. How so, General? 3 of the identified assets were high-ranking members of Congress with oversight responsibilities for military appropriations. 2 were federal judges with lifetime appointments. And 1— Hayes paused, his eyes finding Trump again. 1 was someone no one expected. The tension in the courtroom ratcheted up another notch. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, caught up in the drama unfolding before her. Who was this unexpected individual, General Hayes? Hayes took a deep breath, the kind a soldier takes before charging into battle. Senator Patricia Williams, the Senate Majority Leader and the President's most vocal congressional ally. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Senator Williams had been Trump's strongest supporter, his most trusted legislative partner, the woman who had defended him through 2 impeachment proceedings and countless investigations. General, you're testifying that Senator Williams was working as a foreign agent? Not initially, Hayes clarified. Our investigation revealed that she had been compromised through a romantic relationship with a Chinese intelligence officer. She was being blackmailed into providing classified information. From her position on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Chen walked back to the prosecution table and retrieved another file. General Hayes, when you briefed President Trump on these findings, what was his reaction? Hayes closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to block out a painful memory. When he opened them, they were filled with something that looked like regret. He ordered me to bury the investigation. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison's gavel rang out like gunshots as she called for order, but the damage was done. The revelation that Trump had ordered the burial of evidence against his closest congressional ally sent shockwaves through the packed gallery. General Hayes, Chen continued once order was restored. You testified that President Trump ordered you to bury the investigation into Senator Williams. Can you be more specific about these orders? Hayes looked older than his 63 years as he leaned into the microphone. The president's exact words were, "Patricia Williams is essential to our agenda. Whatever you found, it stays buried. National security depends on maintaining the balance of power in Congress. And how did you respond to this order? I told him that burying evidence of foreign espionage was potentially treasonous and that I could not, in good conscience, follow such an order. The weight of Hayes' words settled over the courtroom like a shroud. This was a four-star general, a man who had dedicated his life to following orders, admitting that he had refused a direct command from his commander-in-chief. What happened next, General? Hayes' voice became almost clinical, as if he were briefing officers on a military operation. The president became agitated. He reminded me that he had the authority to relieve me of command, to end my career with a single phone call. He said that sometimes protecting America meant making difficult choices. Did he threaten you directly? He said that if word of the Senator Williams' investigation ever became public, he would ensure that I was court-martialed for conducting unauthorized surveillance on American citizens. He reminded me that Operation Shadowfall had been conducted under executive authority that could be revoked retroactively. Defense Attorney Whitfield was on his feet again. Objection. This is hearsay and speculation. The witness was present. For the conversation he's describing, Judge Morrison ruled. Overruled. Chen moved closer to the witness stand, his voice taking on an edge that hadn't been there before. General Hayes, despite these threats, did you comply with the president's order to bury the investigation? Hayes was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands folded in his lap. When he looked up, his eyes were steel. No, I did not. What did you do instead? I made copies of all evidence related to Senator Williams and the other compromised individuals. I secured these documents in a classified facility at the Pentagon, with instructions that they were to be released only in the event of my death, or if the national security implications became too great to ignore. And when did those implications become too great to ignore? Hayes straightened his shoulders, every inch the warrior he had been throughout his career. When I learned that the president was planning to share the intelligence we had gathered through Operation Shadowfall with foreign governments. The courtroom fell silent again, the kind of silence that precedes an earthquake. Chen paused, clearly, recognizing the magnitude of what had just been said. General, are you testifying that President Trump planned to share classified intelligence with foreign powers? Not just any intelligence, Hayes clarified. He planned to share the complete files on all 17 compromised individuals, including the methods we used to identify them and the extent of their cooperation with foreign agents. To which foreign governments? Hayes looked directly at Trump, who had gone pale behind the defendant's table. Russia, China, and North Korea. The same countries whose agents had been running operations against us. The implications were staggering. If true, Trump hadn't just obstructed justice. He had planned to hand over American intelligence assets to hostile foreign powers. How do you know this, General Hayes? Because he asked me to facilitate the transfer. On June 3rd, 3 years ago, the president summoned me to the Oval Office and informed me that he intended to use the Shadowfall intelligence as leverage in upcoming negotiations with those countries. He ordered me to prepare the files for transfer. And your response? Hayes' voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. I told him that such an action would constitute treason against the United States of America, and that I would not be party to it. What happened then? The president relieved me of my duties related to Operation Shadowfall and transferred oversight to someone he felt would be more cooperative. Who was that person, General Hayes? Hayes paused, knowing that his next words would destroy yet another life. General Michael Foster, then Deputy Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. The name hit the courtroom like a physical blow. General Foster had died in a car accident 2 years ago, taking whatever secrets he possessed to his grave. Or so everyone had thought. General Hayes, do you have evidence to support these allegations? Hayes reached into his jacket and withdrew a small digital device. I do. This contains recordings of every conversation I had with President Trump regarding Operation Shadowfall, including his orders to bury the investigation and his plans to share classified intelligence with foreign powers. Chen took the device, with hands that barely trembled. Your Honor, the prosecution submits this evidence as Exhibit A, As the recording device was entered into evidence, Hayes felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. The weight of absolute truth finally being spoken in a forum where it mattered. But he wasn't finished yet. The digital playback system's red light glowed like an accusation in the silent courtroom. Special Prosecutor Chen held the device General Hayes had provided, its small form containing what could be the most damaging evidence against a former president in American history. Your Honor, Chen announced, the prosecution requests permission to play selected excerpts from General Hayes's recordings. Judge Morrison nodded gravely. Permission granted. General Hayes, you recorded your conversations with then-President Trump? Hayes leaned toward the microphone, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. Ma'am, as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I was required to maintain detailed records of all communications regarding classified operations. These recordings were made pursuant to Department of Defense Regulation 5105-221, which mandates documentation of all directives involving special access programs. Very well. Proceed, Mr. Chen. The prosecutor activated the device, and suddenly the courtroom was filled with voices from 3 years past. The audio quality was crystal clear, professional grade, equipment capturing every nuance of tone and inflection. Bill, I need you to understand something. Trump's voice was unmistakable, carrying the familiar cadence that had dominated news cycles for years. Patricia Williams cannot go down. She's the key to everything we're trying to accomplish. Whatever your people found, it needs to disappear. Hayes's recorded voice responded with military precision. Mr. President, Senator Williams has been compromised by foreign intelligence. The evidence is overwhelming. She's passed classified information to Chinese agents for over 18 months. I don't care if she's been talking to little green men from Mars. She stays in place. That's an order, General. Sir, with respect, bearing evidence of espionage is what, Bill? Treasonous? You know what's treasonous? Letting my enemies in Congress destroy everything I've built. Williams stays clean and Operation Shadowfall never happened. Are we clear? The recording continued for several more minutes, capturing Hayes's increasingly desperate attempts to convince Trump of the national security implications and Trump's growing anger at being questioned. Chen paused the playback. General Hayes, when was this conversation recorded? March 28, 3 years ago, approximately 2 weeks after I briefed the President on Senator Williams's compromise. And did you comply with his order at that time? I told him I would review the situation, but I did not destroy the evidence. Chen activated the device again. This time the voices were more heated, the conversation clearly taking place weeks later. God damn it, Bill. I thought we had an understanding. Why am I hearing rumors about Shadowfall from my intelligence briefers? Hayes's voice on the recording was calmer but firm. Mr. President, I cannot in good conscience allow compromised individuals to continue operating in positions of national security importance. You cannot. You work for me, General. I am the President of the United States, and when I give you an order, you follow it. Period. My oath is to the Constitution, sir, not to any individual, including you. There was a long pause in the recording, filled only with the sound of breathing and the distant hum of White House machinery. You know, Bill, I've been thinking, maybe it's time for some fresh leadership at the Pentagon, younger blood, someone who understands the big picture. Are you threatening me, Mr. President? I don't threaten, General. I make decisions. And I've decided that if Operation Shadowfall or any information about Senator Williams ever sees the light of day, you'll find yourself explaining to a court-martial why you conducted unauthorized surveillance on American citizens. How do you think that plays out for your precious honor and duty? The courtroom was mesmerized by the raw power dynamics playing out through the speakers. This wasn't the sanitized version of politics usually seen in public. This was the ugly reality of power being wielded without restraint. Chen stopped the recording again. General Hayes, did you feel threatened by these words? I understood them as a direct threat to my career, my reputation, and potentially my freedom if I didn't comply with orders I believed to be illegal. And yet you still didn't comply? Hayes looked directly at the jury, his eyes reflecting decades of military service and moral certainty. I could not betray my oath to the Constitution, regardless of the personal consequences. Chen loaded a different section of the recording. General, I'm now going to play excerpts from what you've identified as the June 3rd conversation regarding intelligence sharing with foreign powers. The courtroom held its collective breath as Trump's voice filled the room again. But this time, the tone was different, more conspiratorial, almost excited. Bill, I've been talking to some very smart people about the Shadowfall intelligence. We've got leverage here that could reshape America's position in the world. I'm not sure I follow, Mr. President. Think about it. We know who's been working for the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans. That's valuable information. Information that could be shared in the right circumstances. Hayes's recorded voice carried clear alarm. Sir, are you suggesting we provide classified intelligence to foreign governments? I'm suggesting we use every tool at our disposal to advance American interests. If that means letting our competitors know what we know about their operations, so be it. Imagine the trade deals we could negotiate with this kind of leverage. The recording captured Hayes's horrified response and Trump's increasingly detailed explanation of his plans to use American intelligence as a bargaining chip in international negotiations. As the playback ended, the courtroom remained frozen in stunned silence. Chen looked at the jury, knowing that they had just heard a former president casually discussing what amounted to treason. General Hayes, Chen said quietly, after this conversation, what did you do? Hayes straightened his uniform jacket, a gesture that seemed to give him strength. I began preparing to expose everything regardless of the personal cost. And why did you wait 3 years to come forward? Hayes looked one final time at Trump, then back to the jury. Because I hoped I would never have to make this choice. But when the evidence came to light that classified documents had been mishandled, I realized that the threats to national security I had tried to prevent were still ongoing. The general's testimony was nearly complete, but the most devastating revelation was yet to come. As General Hayes prepared to step down from the witness stand, Special Prosecutor Chen held up a hand. General, I have one final question. Hayes settled back into his chair, his weathered face showing the strain of 3 years of silence finally broken. You mentioned that President Trump transferred oversight of Operation Shadowfall to General Foster after you refused to comply with his orders. General Foster died in a car accident 2 years ago. Do you have any information about the circumstances surrounding his death? Defense Attorney Whitfield shot to his feet. Objection. This line of questioning is prejudicial and speculative. Your Honor, Chen interrupted. General Hayes has direct knowledge relevant to this question. Judge Morrison considered for a moment. I'll allow it, but proceed carefully, Mr. Chen. Hayes took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would shatter whatever remained of Washington's carefully constructed facade. General Foster came to see me 2 weeks before his death. He was distraught. He told me that he had been ordered to facilitate the transfer of Shadowfall intelligence to foreign contacts, and that he had complied with those orders. The courtroom was so quiet that the ventilation system seemed deafening. He said that President Trump had convinced him it was necessary for national security, that we were trading old intelligence for new information that would help protect America. But Foster had discovered that wasn't true. The information we provided was being used to compromise new American assets overseas. Chen moved closer to the witness stand. What else did General Foster tell you? He said he had evidence of the intelligence transfers and that he was planning to go public. He asked for my help in preparing his testimony. And did you help him? Hayes's voice grew heavy with regret. I told him to be careful, that powerful people would do anything to protect themselves. I offered to provide security, to help him get his evidence to the proper authorities safely. What was his response? He said it was too late for caution, that American lives were at stake because of what he had done, and that he couldn't live with the consequences of his silence. Chen paused, letting the implication sink in. General Hayes, do you believe General Foster's death was accidental? Hayes looked directly at Trump, who sat motionless at the defendant's table, his face ashen. General Foster was the most careful driver I knew. He had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, countless dangerous missions. The idea that he would lose control of his vehicle on a straight stretch of highway he had driven thousands of times. Hayes shook his head. I have my doubts. Do you have any evidence to support those doubts? Hayes reached into his jacket and withdrew another device, this one smaller, older looking. General Foster gave me this 2 days before his death. It contains copies of all the intelligence transfer authorizations, communications with foreign EU, contacts and documentation of the American assets who were compromised as a result. The courtroom erupted again, but Judge Morrison's gavel quickly restored order. Your Honor, Chen announced, the prosecution submits this as Exhibit B. As the second device was entered into evidence, Hayes continued. There's something else. Foster told me that the intelligence transfers were ongoing, that they hadn't stopped with Operation Shadowfall. He said there was a network of individuals, still providing classified information to foreign powers, operating under direct presidential authority. Chen's voice was barely above a whisper. Is this network still operational, General Hayes? Hayes nodded grimly. As far as I know, yes. The investigation that began with Operation Shadowfall uncovered something far larger than foreign agents infiltrating our military. It revealed a systematic compromise of American intelligence that reaches the highest levels of government. And you believe former President Trump was at the center of this compromise? Hayes straightened his shoulders. One final time. Every ribbon and decoration on his chest catching the courtroom lights, based on the evidence I've seen, the conversations I've recorded, and the tragic fate of General Foster. I believe Donald Trump committed treason against the United States of America, not through incompetence or poor judgment, but through deliberate, calculated actions that put American lives at risk for personal gain. The silence that followed was absolute. 12 jurors stared at the four-star general who had just accused a former president of the highest crime against the state. Reporters frantically scribbled notes that would reshape American politics forever. And at the defendant's table, Donald Trump sat frozen, the weight of decades of secrets finally crushing down upon him. Chen walked back to the prosecution table, his case complete. No further questions, Your Honor. As General Hayes finally stepped down from the witness stand, his duty complete after 3 years of agonizing silence, he walked past the defendant's table. For just a moment his eyes met Trump's, and in that exchange was the recognition of two men who had once served their country in different ways, now forever divided by their interpretation of what that service meant. Judge Morrison called for recess, but the damage was done. The most decorated general of his generation had spoken truth to power, and that truth would echo through history long after the last gavel fell. In the end, it wasn't politics or partisan warfare that brought down a former president. It was the simple, devastating power of one man's oath to the Constitution and his refusal to break it no matter the cost. The trial would continue, but the verdict had already been written in the steady voice of a soldier who chose honor over silence, duty over self-preservation, and country over everything else. General William Hayes had kept his final promise to his nation and to his fallen friend who had died trying to do the same.